Chris Andrew. I was the CEO of Greenlight Technology Group, based out of Sydney, Australia, and nowadays I work at the Australian National University within the First Nations portfolio. I'm now sort of trying to hark back to a project that we did with the support of REEP back in 2009 and 2010, which started life as the hotel sector energy efficiency project in Fiji. The idea being we would look at energy efficiency and see what specific gains we could make in terms of achieving lower costs for the hotel sector in Fiji, given that tourism in Fiji was equivalent to around 30% of the GDP, and a significant proportion of the energy costs were related to air conditioning. So energy efficiency seemed to be something that we could focus in on and look at trying to gain some quick wins in that. What happened when Greenlight, we landed in Fiji and started building up a network, is it became pretty paramount to us with a bit more engagement of the local community and local stakeholders. There was a greater demand and a bit more of a conversation to be had in a more broader project, which we reframed our initiative with REEP's permission to look more sort of holistically at a low carbon tourism initiative. This allowed a little bit broader a platform to bring stakeholders in, and certainly mixed what we were trying to do in terms of mobilised finance and technology with support from government and principally the tourism sector, because it could add into enhancing the brand. So that's where its initial goals and aims, and I think on reflection we achieved ultimately what we set out to do. It's finished, and Greenlight Technology persevered for a few more years after the project and some other initial work we'd done in Australia, but ultimately the political situation in Australia and some backflips around carbon and energy pricing sort of saw us move in different directions, and saw me move and step out into something different. In terms of how REEP helped Greenlight Technology, it really was our platform to get into the Pacific. We've been looking at, and we were involved in a number of energy efficiency initiatives as a startup in Australia, but we could see a real opportunity given the high energy prices, the significant demand on diesel in the Pacific, the need to sort of offset what was an Australian footprint being imposed in the Pacific by tourism, that we could extend some of the work we've been doing and pilot some projects in the Pacific with some proven technology. And it was also a way of sort of mobilising sort of a multi-stakeholder approach that we trialled and had some modest success in Australia with, and thought again that might be quite well suited to the Fijian sort of landscape. So REEP basically gave us the baseline funding to take a risk to a certain extent and trial our model, not necessarily our technology, offshore. I think with that sort of financial support, what it really enabled us to do is take a little bit more risk in our approach and be a lot more adaptive. And it's interesting, in the sort of the 2022 sort of frame, words like agile development and pivoting are almost commonplace. Back in 2009, very few people were talking about anything agile, and they certainly weren't talking anything about pivoting. So it was really quite an opportunity for us to take a slightly more risky approach to a project, and gave us the confidence that we had the backing of an organisation that was really focused on developing a marketplace, and in such a way was supportive of us being a little bit more exploratory and trialing and erroring and being a little bit adaptive to where we were going. So The partnership of REEP allowed us to try something that hadn't been tried in Fiji. It allowed us to step into a market that we hadn't worked in, but we were confident we could work in. And I think it gave us the confidence that we had the backing of an international sort of development agency to actually go forth and give it a crack. And I think that sort of combination was powerful for us, and I think it translated to our engagements in Fiji, and ultimately what I see is sort of a success of the project in doing what it ultimately set out to do and deliver a framework that was picked up by others over there and could have been used in a broader scale. I think one of the major strengths of the project was part of our ability to bring in a conversation around technology, a conversation around finance, and a conversation around marketing, and with a whole view of how do that sort of nexus of technology, marketing, finance come together for sort of outcomes within the sort of social and community fabric that we were dealing with. And so we were able to look at sort of sustainability in a ways that it did deliver within a Fijian framework along sort of the social, economic and environmental impacts. And that enabled us to align with the Millennium Development Goals that we were seeking to deliver on. And so that was the strength of the project, in so much that it brought this sort of quite multidisciplinary, multi-stakeholder sort of group together. We had banks, we had the Reserve Bank of Fiji, we had technology providers, we had the hotel sector, we had marketing, newspapers, and the tourism sort of ministry. We had private sector involvement and government involvement. And we had quite a lot of sort of groundswell of diverse support coming to us, because as 30% of the GDP, tourism touched on everybody's lives. And it was sort of a sector that had sort of a broad influence within the economy, and not only just within Fiji. Fiji was sort of seen as a leader here, and obviously there was a broader conversation going on within the Pacific. And this provided us, again, a platform to go have conversations in some other Pacific islands. So I think that the strength to our approach was this sort of inclusive, multi-stakeholder initiative where everybody had something to gain from a seat at the table. And to the most extent, everybody had a seat at the table. And I think that sort of generated multiple outcomes, whether it be a technology deliverable, or a policy paper, or written for the Department of Planning, I think from memory, to shifting in some of the frameworks that the Reserve Bank of Fiji had in terms of regulating some of the financial controls and incentives going into renewables. We were able to broaden some of those conversations to include into energy efficiency. It also allowed different groups to come together with similar goals. So whilst there was sort of a broad-based interest in different initiatives around clean energy, we were able to sort of combine interests that were in the biodiesel field with those that are around air conditioning technology, to those that were looking at sort of the solar panels, and link that to a message that combined to Fiji's messaging around low carbon tourism. So again, it was a pathway for a lot of these different groups who are actively involved in trying to achieve something similar in a lot of ways to come together. And again, I think that was part of the success, that everybody saw a benefit to being part of this group. In terms of, the model for low carbon tourism in Fiji, and whether we sort of created a lasting alliance, I would say when we had the Ministry of Energy, the Hotel Association, the Minister for Tourism, Director of Energy, and the Reserve Bank, and a number of other players sitting at a table sort of talking about clean energy and sustainable energy and delivering Millennium Development Goals. I think that model was hugely successful because it brought people with a common goal from different parts of Fiji and that sort of Fijian sort of tourism ecology that first didn't realise what a key component to tourism they played in a lot of ways. And secondly, how influential they could be on the overall success of Fiji in terms of their business and its connection to brand Fiji. So I think it was really quite useful. And what that model has taught me in later life is catalysing these sort of multi-stakeholder groups in situations where sometimes they don't recognise the benefit they have in certain environments or don't see that as something that they can gain some sort of mutual benefit from, has been sort of a pathway that I've certainly personally used out of the Fiji project in a couple of different sort of forums, and it's been successful in a lot of ways. I think also the mere fact that we had WWF and the World Bank getting involved and looking to leverage some of the project sort of was a testament to the success. And my understanding is that WWF took the model and applied it in Indonesia through Bali. I must confess I didn't keep track of that initiative. So again, it was a model that was picked up and tried to be replicated in a much bigger sector. And so I guess that's sort of a testament to the benefit of REEP. They're able to utilise and test a model in the Pacific that was able to be invested in, people could learn from it, and they're able to share that learning in a different sort of setting. I think that was, today we talk about venture capital and angel investors and a whole lot of startups and innovation hubs. I think REEP was probably 15, 20 years ahead of the time of where we see everybody operating now. So I feel blessed in a lot of ways that I reached out to REEP so early on in our startup journey and was able to sort of do this project because it sort of set a platform for future success in other areas. So I guess that's sort of a great segue into, did we see any unanticipated positives? As I said, I think REEP's sort of invest, learn, share model is a model that is replicable in a whole lot of other sectors. And here in Australia, it's easily replicable in not only just the clean energy space, but a number of other different sort of initiatives where we need to better mobilise actions to deliver on sustainable development goals, especially in the area that I'm sitting in at the moment within the First Nations portfolio and First Nations economic development. I think REEP also played a really key role in catalysing interest and mobilising existing development agencies in the Pacific to think differently, and showcased in some ways, and possibly part of the tragedy in this project is that those agencies, while operating, really hadn't invested in a whole lot of local capacity. So one of the positive outcomes was at least it made certain groups think differently about what their investments and what their capacity build objectives were in the Pacific. And I think there were some sort of legacies out of that, albeit how long they lasted within a shifting sort of geopolitical frame is probably a little bit questionable. I think the third part that was unexpected is that we had one of the sort of the leading CDM developers from Australia, Cool Energy, get interested in the project. They could see, having had success, I think it was a Mexican light bulb program where they got huge scale out of doing that sort of initiative in the early 2000s, that they could see this program offering sort of a model amongst the small island developing states and something that we could aggregate these sorts of carbon opportunities. Again, I think that opportunity was curtailed somewhat when the Prime Minister of Australia at the time, Kevin Rudd, sort of backflipped on his participation, and we entered into a decade of carbon debates. And so that may well have been a bit of a death knell to certain carbon development opportunities, but I think that still exists. And that type of catalytic approach, especially in these sort of developing spaces, is one that I see REEP having lots of potential to reteach Australia in some of our areas on how to go about catalysing change. So it's been a wonderful reminisce of a project that probably I started when I didn't have as many grey hairs, and it's been wonderful to pick it up and to thank REEP for having the faith in Greenlight Technology at the time, and for all their ongoing support. And at some stage, somewhere, it'd be great to collaborate again, but you never know. Thank you very much.